My family demanded I invite my sister, the same sister who once slept with my fiancé, to my wedding. I told them I wouldn't. But what I did do instead, let's just say no one saw it coming. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Sunshine, vows, champagne toasts, and dancing under fairy lights. And it was until my mother saw who I had invited. I still remember the silence that fell over the room like the music had been sucked out of the air. My mom's wine glass froze midair, my sister's jaw dropped, and my father's face went red. Their horror was exactly what I needed to see. Instead of letting them manipulate my guest list, I invited the one person they feared more than bad publicity, my Aunt Julie, the woman they exiled from our lives years ago, the family ghost no one was supposed to mention. If they wanted drama, I brought the damn fireworks. Growing up, I used to believe my family was special. We weren't perfect, but I thought we had a kind of unspoken love underneath all the dysfunction. Especially with my older sister Ellie. Before everything shattered, she was my hero. Ellie was 4 years older than me, but when I was a kid, that didn't matter. She let me tag along when she went to the mall with her friends, did my hair for school dances, and once even punched a boy in the hallway for making fun of my braces. She was magnetic, smart, charming, the kind of person everyone wanted to be around, and I, naturally, worshipped her. Our parents adored her. My mom would boast about Ellie's debate trophies to anyone who would listen, and my dad used to say she'd be the first female CEO in our family. They were proud of her, and I was proud to be her sister. When I turned 15, she helped me sneak out to my first party. I still remember the way she winked at me when I walked past our parents on the way out, dressed like I was going to a study group. That night, when I drank cheap vodka for the first time and cried over a boy who didn't text back, she held my hair back in the bathroom and made sure I got home safe. But as much as I loved her, I was always aware that I was the second act. Ellie shined in the spotlight, while I stood quietly behind the curtain. It wasn't that my parents didn't love me, they just didn't see me. When Ellie entered a room, they lit up. When I walked in, it was like I was background noise. Still, I tried. I studied hard, joined clubs, and played the cello, hoping they'd notice me too. I even turned down a scholarship to a music school in another state because Mom said it would be too much trouble to fly out for performances. I wanted to make things easier for them. I wanted to be loved without causing a fuss. It got worse after Aunt Julie left. I was around 13 when it happened, and no one told me why. One day she was there, helping me make cookies, slipping me $20 bills when my allowance ran out, and the next, she was gone. My parents told me not to ask. She made her choices, my father said, like that explained everything. Ellie didn't seem to miss her. Maybe she was too busy or maybe she knew something I didn't, but I missed her terribly. Julie was the only adult who treated me like I mattered. Losing her felt like losing a part of myself. After that, our family dinners got quieter, the jokes stopped, my mom got stricter about food and looks. She started commenting on everything I ate, telling me to watch it if I reached for seconds. My dad became more distant, always on his laptop, checking his investments or watching market trends. And Ellie, well, Ellie kept shining. Prom queen, valedictorian, early acceptance to Stanford. I clapped for her at every milestone, my heart aching with a mix of pride and something darker I didn't want to name. There were moments, though, brief, flickering moments, when Ellie would reach out again. Once, she drove 2 hours to pick me up from a sleepover gone wrong. Another time, she surprised me with tickets to see my favorite band. For a night, it felt like old times. We danced in the rain outside the venue, laughing like we were kids again. Those memories became lifelines, proof that underneath the growing distance, she still cared, or so I thought. One winter afternoon, I got sick and missed school for a week. Ellie brought home a tray with soup and toast, sat on my bed and told me about her day like nothing had changed. I remember staring at her, thinking, maybe this is what being a sister's supposed to feel like. That was the kind of hope I clung to, small, scattered kindnesses that made me forget the bigger picture. But no matter how much it hurt, I never blamed her. I told myself this was what love looked like, showing up, cheering loudly, even when you felt invisible. And that's what I kept doing. Loving my family the only way I knew how, quietly, completely, and without asking for anything back. The cracks didn't show up all at once. They came slowly, in little moments that didn't feel like much, until they were everything. At first, it was easy to dismiss. My mom reminded me not to eat too much bread at dinner. My dad brushed off my college dreams because you're more of a creative type, not academic. Ellie borrowed my things without asking, then blamed me when something broke. I told myself it was normal. Every family had issues, but over time, the weight of those small insults began to settle on my shoulders like bricks. The real shift came after I turned 16. My parents started treating me more like an obligation than a daughter. I'd get home from school to an empty house, cook dinner for myself, and eat alone most nights. They stopped asking how my day was, stopped noticing altogether. Meanwhile, Ellie still got everything: attention, praise, freedom. She crashed the car once, and Dad bought her a new one the next week. I got grounded for coming home 10 minutes late from the library. I once overheard my mom on the phone telling a friend, "Tessa's sweet, but Ellie's the one with real potential." It felt like someone had kicked me in the chest. I started pulling away, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how to stay close to people who only noticed me when I failed. I still showed up for family dinners and still smiled in holiday photos, but I was shrinking inside. One summer, I landed a part-time job at a local bookstore. It was the first time I felt seen. My boss, a sharp-witted woman named Renee, praised my ideas. Customers remembered my name. I stayed late on purpose, anything to delay going home. That fall, I applied to an out-of-state university without telling anyone. I got in. When I finally worked up the courage to share the news, my parents barely reacted. My dad said, "We'll talk about it later," and never brought it up again. But the moment that truly broke me came just before graduation. I'd been saving up for a senior trip to Europe with a few friends. 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, I discovered my college fund, money my grandparents had left me, was suddenly empty. My parents had borrowed it to help Ellie with tuition and expenses. No one asked me, no one even apologized. When I confronted them, my mom said, "Ellie needed it more. You'll understand one day." Understand that my future negotiable, that my hard work could be erased with a shrug? I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the edge of my bed staring out the window, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The next day, I canceled my trip, told my friends some lies about family stuff. Then I packed up the acceptance letter from the out-of-state school and shoved it in the back of my closet. What was the point? That summer, while Ellie prepared to leave for grad school, I stayed behind. I enrolled in the local community college, commuted from home, and worked weekends. It felt like my life had been downsized. There was one afternoon that summed it all up. Ellie came home with a new designer bag, gifted by mom for how hard she's been working. I walked in holding groceries I'd bought with my bookstore paycheck. Mom looked at me and asked, "Did you remember to get almond milk?" No hello, no thank you. I stood there, dripping from the rain, holding a wet paper bag, and I just nodded. Sometimes I wondered if I was imagining it all, if maybe I was just too sensitive. Maybe they did love me, just in a way I didn't understand. But then I'd remember the Christmas when they forgot to get me a gift, said it must have gotten lost in the chaos. Meanwhile, Ellie unwrapped a smart watch, a new coat, and a handwritten letter from Dad, telling her how proud he was. All I got was a generic candle with the tag still on it. That was the night I stopped believing I was ever really part of the picture. From then on, I played my role quietly, an afterthought in my own home. I didn't think things could get worse. I was wrong. By the time I met Jason, I had just started feeling like maybe I had a shot at something resembling normal. He was kind, attentive, and had this calming energy that made me feel safe for the first time in years. We met in a lit class during my sophomore year of community college. He laughed at my sarcasm. I liked the way he listened. We fell into something easy, gentle. He wasn't flashy or loud like the guys Ellie used to date, but he made me feel important, and more than anything, I needed that. We dated for over a year. He met my parents once. Mom barely said hello, and Dad talked stocks through dinner. Jason laughed it off, but I could tell he noticed. He never complained, though. He never made me feel like I had to choose. That was what made it hurt so much. The night it happened, I remember coming home early from a study session. The lights were on. Ellie's car was in the driveway. Weird. She'd been living in the city for months. I walked in and called out, no answer. Then I heard it, a laugh, hers, then his. At first I froze. My brain refused to put it together. I walked toward the noise like I was sleepwalking. And there they were in the kitchen, her sitting on the counter, him standing between her knees, laughing. His hand was on her thigh, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I dropped my bag. They both turned. Tessa, Jason started stepping forward. I walked out. I didn't scream, didn't cry. I just walked until my legs gave out near the park. I sat on a bench until the sun rose, listening to the sounds of the city waking up while my chest cracked open. I didn't tell anyone, not for days. I couldn't. I felt stupid, embarrassed, betrayed beyond words. When I finally told my mom, she blinked. Are you sure you saw what you think you saw? I watched them, I said. She was on the counter, Mom. Mom sighed. Sweetheart, maybe don't make this bigger than it needs to be. It's not worth destroying the family over one misunderstanding. It was like she hadn't heard me at all. Ellie's always been impulsive. She didn't mean it. I'm sure she feels terrible. She didn't look terrible, I snapped. She looked happy. That's when Mom's tone changed. Tessa, don't be dramatic. You've always had a way of twisting things. Let it go. Let it go. Like my pain was a temporary glitch. Like my trust wasn't worth defending. I left home that week, packed a duffel bag, moved into a friend's couch, and stopped answering calls. I didn't say goodbye. They didn't come after me. A week later, I got a text from Ellie, just 2 words, I'm sorry. I deleted it without replying. From that moment on, I stopped trying to belong. The family I had fought so hard to be part of no longer existed for me. They'd made their choice, and now I was making mine. The betrayal didn't just shatter my relationship, it rewrote my entire past with Ellie. Every memory became tainted. The time she helped me pick out a dress for a date, was she already measuring herself against me? Every compliment she gave Jason, every innocent nudge, were they just masks for something else? I replayed everything, the double takes she used to give him, the sly little smiles, the night we all went to dinner and she laughed a little too hard at one of his jokes. I remembered the way she hugged him goodbye, just a second too long. And Jason, God, I thought he loved me. He told me he did. He used to brush my hair out of my face and say I was the best thing that ever happened to him. He held my hand in the dark and whispered things that made me believe in a future. Our future. I felt stupid for believing any of it. I didn't eat for 3 days. Couldn't. My stomach twisted every time I remembered their faces. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the way my family refused to acknowledge it. To them, my pain was inconvenient, something to gloss over for the sake of keeping things neat, keeping Ellie comfortable. Dad never called, not once. I heard from a cousin that he told people I was taking a break to sort out personal issues. Personal issues. A sister had slept with my boyfriend, and I was the unstable one. The worst part was how easy it was for them to move on. I saw photos online of Ellie at brunch with my mom a week later, all smiles, a new necklace around her neck. One Jason once said he wanted to buy me. It felt like a punch. I wanted to scream, to destroy something, to make them feel what I was feeling. But instead, I just vanished. I stopped posting, changed my number, I quit my job at the bookstore, and left town for a while. It wasn't until months later, after therapy, after nights of crying into borrowed pillows, after slowly rebuilding my sense of self, that I looked in the mirror and didn't see just the girl who was betrayed. I saw someone surviving. I never spoke to Jason again. I heard through mutual friends that he and Ellie didn't last. Apparently, she got bored. Typical. But I wasn't interested in revenge, not yet. That would come later. First, I needed to find out who I was without them. And so I did. Starting over wasn't a clean break. It was messy, slow, and full of days where I questioned everything. At first, I slept too much. I thought the distance would bring relief, but the silence just echoed louder. I'd wake up on my friend Harper's couch and feel like a ghost haunting someone else's life. Harper was patient. She never asked too many questions, just slid me coffee in the mornings and offered quiet company in the evenings. We'd sit on the balcony, wrapped in blankets, watching traffic lights change, saying nothing. Sometimes that silence felt kinder than all the words my family had never said. I picked up a part-time job at a small cafe. It was mindless work, brewing lattes, cleaning tables, but the routine helped. People came and went without knowing who I was or what I'd been through. I found a strange kind of comfort in that anonymity. Still, the weight didn't lift. I kept playing the moment over and over. Jason's hand on Ellie's thigh, my mom's voice telling me to let it go. I'd try to distract myself with playlists and late-night TV, but the grief always came back, like a tide that wouldn't stop rising. I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Layton, and at first I hated her calmness. It felt fake, but she asked questions no one else did, and she listened. "Who gets to decide your worth?" she asked once. "I don't know," I said. "I guess no one." She smiled gently. "Or maybe it's you." That thought stayed with me. Slowly, I began to reclaim little parts of myself. I started journaling again, playing cello in the quiet hours after work. I painted my room pale yellow because it felt like sunlight. I bought myself flowers every Friday, and I stopped following Ellie on social media. I still have updates, though, through mutual friends, through whispers. Jason had moved on. Ellie was dating someone new. My parents were telling people I was finding myself. They had no idea. But it was Grandma who surprised me one afternoon. She called me, just out of the blue. "Tessa," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I miss you." I nearly dropped my phone. She hadn't reached out since the blow-up. I'd assumed she'd taken their side, like always. "I miss you too," I said, voice cracking. We talked for an hour, about nothing at first. Her garden, the weather, old recipes, but then she said something that stuck. "I always thought you were the strong one," she said, even when no one else saw it. I cried after that call, not because I was sad, but because someone had finally seen me, and it lit a tiny spark. I started thinking about things I'd buried, like Aunt Julie. I hadn't seen her in years, not since she disappeared, but Grandma's words made me wonder what really happened back then. Why did everyone act like she didn't exist? That curiosity would change everything. One night, I finally asked Harper, "Do you think people can be born into the wrong family?" She didn't hesitate. "I think some families lose the right to keep you." That answer changed something in me. I stopped trying to earn love from people who never intended to give it freely. I stopped rereading old texts, hoping for a better ending. I started writing my own. On one of my slower cafe shifts, I opened an old shoebox I'd kept under my bed for years. Inside were letters from Aunt Julie, birthday cards with stickers, doodles of animals, and little poems. I realized she had written to me long after she left. My parents just never gave me the letters. One postcard stood out. It was from a beach town I'd always wanted to visit. She wrote, "If you're ever lost, look for the water. It always knows where to go." I held that card in my hand for a long time. Then I Googled the town. It was 2 hours away. That weekend, I rented a car and drove there. No destination, just following instinct. I walked along the boardwalk, watched seagulls fight over fries, and listened to the waves crash like applause against the shore. It felt like Aunt Julie had led me there. I wasn't ready to find her yet, but for the first time, I wanted to. Recovery wasn't linear. There were still nights I woke up with tears on my pillow, dreams of family dinners where I finally got to speak and be heard. But then morning would come, and I'd lace up my shoes and go for a walk, breathing in the kind of peace I'd never known at home. Every step I took away from them brought me closer to myself. I wasn't healed, but I wasn't broken anymore either. I was becoming. I didn't plan on finding Aunt Julie, it just happened. After visiting that beach town, I kept thinking about her, about how easily my parents had erased her from our lives. I remembered the way she used to braid my hair and whisper silly rhymes in my ear. She used to sneak me pieces of chocolate and call me her sunbeam. One night, I typed her name into Facebook. Nothing. I tried Instagram, LinkedIn. I even Googled her. Nothing. It was Harper who helped me find her. "Try property records," she said one night, curled on the couch beside me. She might have stayed close. She had. Julie lived just 2 towns away, in a modest house with a red mailbox and a tiny rose garden in front. I stared at the address on my phone for a long time before driving over. When she opened the door, she looked older. Her hair had silver streaks and she wore reading glasses, but her eyes were the same. Kind, soft, watchful. She blinked. "Tessa." I nodded. She opened the door wider without a word. Inside, everything smelled like vanilla and old books. There were plants everywhere, windowsills, countertops, even in the bathroom. She made tea while I sat stiffly on her floral couch. We talked for hours. She told me everything about how my parents had lied to Grandma, said Julie was stealing money, planning to run away, didn't care about anyone but herself. Julie tried to fight back, but every word was twisted, and every attempt to explain was used against her. Eventually, she gave up, moved away, started over. She'd written me letters every birthday, every holiday. She said she'd call, but Mom always answered, "Wrong number," Mom would say, then hang up. I felt sick, but mostly I felt relieved someone had wanted me, someone had fought for me, even if I never knew it. Over the next few months, I visited Julie often. She taught me how to cook from scratch. We watched bad TV and laughed until our bellies hurt. She told me stories about my mom from when they were kids, how she used to fake crying to get out of chores, how she always had to be right. It made everything click. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was crazy. I wasn't broken. I had just grown up in a house where love was conditional, and now I was learning a new way to live. Julie encouraged me to go back to school, not for anyone else, but for myself. I enrolled in a program for art therapy. It felt right, like healing others while healing myself. I moved out of Harper's and into a tiny apartment above a bookstore. The floors creaked and the shower made weird noises, but it was mine. I painted the walls a soft green, hung up my cello, adopted a cat, and I invited Grandma over. It took weeks to coordinate, but she came. Julie was nervous. I was terrified. But the moment Grandma stepped into that house and saw Julie, something broke open. They cried, they hugged, they talked for 5 hours. Afterward, Grandma looked at me and said, "I'm sorry for everything." And I believed her. That night, the three of us sat on Julie's porch with blankets on our laps and tea in our hands. The stars above us felt closer than they ever had before. I listened to them swap stories, some painful, some sweet, and realized this was the family I had always longed for. Not perfect, not performative, just real. It didn't make the scars disappear, but it gave them meaning. Julie told me something that stuck with me. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone who keeps moving the goalposts. That became my mantra. I began setting boundaries. When my mom called, I didn't answer. When she texted to say they missed me, I replied, "Please respect my space." It wasn't cruel, it was necessary. Posted a photo one day, me smiling with paint on my hands, a canvas behind me, and my cat curled at my feet. The caption read, "Peace isn't quiet, it's honest." Ellie liked the post, didn't comment, just liked it. I didn't respond because I didn't need to anymore. With Julie and Grandma in my corner, I no longer felt alone. I was building something new, a version of life that didn't depend on approval or apology. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. Healing wasn't a destination, it was a decision I made every single day to keep going. I didn't invite my family to my wedding, at least, not at first. When I got engaged to Caleb, it felt like the universe had finally handed me a moment of peace. He was everything I never knew I needed: gentle, funny, grounded. He listened to understand, not to respond. And more importantly, he never made me feel small. Caleb's family welcomed me like I was already theirs. His mother cried when he proposed. His sister helped me pick a dress. For the first time, I felt like I belonged in a family that chose me, not out of obligation, but out of love. We planned a small ceremony by a lake near where we first met. The guest list was tight: close friends, chosen family. Julie would walk me down the aisle. Grandma would read a poem. And I made it clear Ellie was not invited. That single decision cracked everything open again. My mother called me sobbing. "You can't do this," she said. "You're tearing the family apart." "I'm protecting myself," I replied. "If she doesn't come, we won't either." I paused. "Then don't." So she hung up. What followed was a flurry of texts, guilt trips, and phone calls from extended relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. My dad emailed me a PDF titled, "What Forgiveness Really Means." Ellie sent a bouquet of white roses with a card that said, "Let's move forward." I tossed them in the trash. But I wasn't done. If they wanted to play games, I would play mine better. I invited someone else instead. Julie's name went on the program as matron of honor. And then, for good measure, I sent an invite to my parents' oldest enemy, the very woman they had betrayed, exiled, and tried to erase. Actually, I didn't tell anyone until the day of the wedding. The moment my mother stepped out of the car and saw Julie, her face drained of color. "You invited her?" she hissed. "She's family," I said simply. The ceremony was beautiful. The lake shimmered. Caleb cried. I held Julie's arm as I walked down the aisle, and Grandma read her poem like it was a prayer. But the real show came during the reception. Julie pulled Grandma aside. I didn't know what was said exactly, but I saw the way Grandma's eyes widened, then narrowed. She looked over at my parents with something like rage and sorrow in equal measure. Later that night, Grandma took the mic. She stood on the small stage, holding her wine glass, and said, "There's something I need to say." The tent fell silent. For years, I believed things that weren't true. I let myself be manipulated. I lost someone precious because of it, but not anymore. She turned to Julie. "I'm sorry I didn't fight for you, and I'm so proud of the woman you've become." Julie's hands trembled. Tears rolled down her cheeks. My mom got up and tried to interrupt. "Mom, please, this isn't the time." But Grandma held up a hand. "You've had enough time." People clapped, not politely, loudly. My parents left 20 minutes later, faces like stone. Ellie didn't even look at me when she followed them out. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't trembling. I was finally gloriously free. Ellie tried to salvage the moment. She went live on Instagram just outside the venue, pretending she was holding back tears. I found out later that she claimed she'd been blindsided and humiliated in front of everyone. But the thing about public drama is that it cuts both ways. People started commenting, asking why she was even there if she knew she wasn't welcome. One even asked, "Didn't you sleep with her ex?" Ellie quickly deleted the stream, but the screenshots had already circulated. Meanwhile, Caleb stood beside me through it all. When I wavered that morning, when the pressure and guilt made my knees feel weak, he held my face in his hands and said, "This is your day. You get to write it, not relive their script." He made me laugh when I thought I couldn't smile. He toasted to the end of generational trauma and the beginning of actually liking your in-laws. The whole room roared. Later that night, while we danced under string lights, he whispered, "You didn't just survive them, you outgrew them." That stayed with me. The next day, I posted a picture, Julie, Grandma, Caleb, and me, laughing, arms linked. The caption read, "Blood isn't always thicker, sometimes it's just louder." I knew it would get back to them, and I didn't care. Because that wedding wasn't just about marrying Caleb, it was about marrying the life I chose, the people I chose, and the version of myself who refused to be quiet anymore. And if that made me the villain in someone else's story, so be it. They taught me that silence was safety, but that day I learned that truth is louder, and I was done whispering. The fallout from the wedding was swift. Ellie went radio silent for about a week. Then she resurfaced online with a carefully curated narrative, a teary video, soft piano music in the background, and a caption that read, "When family turns on you during your sister's happiest day." I watched it once. She painted herself as the victim, said she was just trying to make amends, that she showed up with nothing but love, claimed she'd been ambushed by the presence of someone who caused our family years of grief. I almost laughed. The comment section split fast. Her followers offered sympathy at first, but then came the receipts, screenshots, stories, people chiming in, connecting dots. Some remembered the Jason scandal. Others mentioned the manipulation, the lies. Someone even pulled up an old photo of Ellie and Jason together, time-stamped months before the breakup. The tide turned quickly. Within days, she made her account private. Meanwhile, I got messages from cousins, old classmates, even one of Dad's former colleagues. They weren't angry, they were apologizing. "I didn't know the half of it," one wrote. "You were always so quiet. I thought you were just shy. I'm sorry for not seeing more." But the biggest shock came from Grandma. She called to say she was rewriting her will. "They don't deserve any of it," she said, "not after what they did to you, to Julie, to me." I told her she didn't need to do that. She insisted, and then she added, "I'm not just giving you the house. I want to move in with Julie. We've lost too many years. I want to spend what time I have left making things right." I cried. Again. Julie helped her move the following week. I took time off work to help paint the guest room. We listened to 70s S-rock and ate grilled cheese on the floor like teenagers. It was simple, it was perfect. My parents found out through the family grapevine. And that's when the calls started again. Voicemails, emails, even a handwritten letter from my dad. At first, they were full of guilt. Please to talk, to come back home, to remember who you are. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. "You've always been difficult. You'll regret this when we're gone. You've poisoned your grandmother." That last one made me laugh. Julie framed it. It now hangs on her fridge like a badge of honor. The truth is, they had chances, so many, and they wasted everyone. Now they're just people I used to know. The fallout didn't stop there. One of Ellie's brand deals quietly dropped her. A makeup company she used to promote unfollowed her on all platforms. I later heard from a friend in PR that the words "bad optics" were used in an internal meeting. As for my parents, they tried to do damage control the way they always had, through denial and redirection. My dad hosted a family barbecue and sent out invitations like nothing had happened. Most didn't show. Those who did notice the tension, the absence. I got photos from a cousin, plates of untouched food, forced smiles, chairs left empty. The silence was loud. I think that's what finally broke him. Not the outrage, not the lost inheritance, The isolation. The realization that no one believed their version of the story anymore. Meanwhile, life on our end was quiet, peaceful. Julie and Grandma planted herbs in the backyard I visited every weekend. Caleb and I hosted game nights with our friends. We baked pies, took naps in the sun, laughed at terrible movies. No big declarations, no revenge plots, just freedom. Just love that didn't need to be earned. One afternoon, I passed by a photo of Ellie and me as kids. We were in matching pajamas, grinning, frosting on our cheeks. I paused. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel anything at all. That's when I knew they were no longer holding any part of me hostage. They lost access not because I hate them, but because I finally love myself more. Some people think closure comes in the form of an apology. I used to think that too. Waited years for the perfect reckoning, the tearful confession, the handwritten letter, the moment they'd say, "You were right and we were wrong." It never came. And somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't need it. Closure for me came in waves, in tiny, quiet moments. The first time I slept through the night without dreaming of family arguments. The time I said no without explaining myself. The afternoon I watched Julie and Grandma laughing over tea, and I didn't feel the urge to take a photo because I wasn't afraid of losing it. I had stopped bracing for impact. I had started living. Some stories don't end with reconciliation, they end with redirection. Ellie still posts sometimes, less now, more curated. Her follower count has dropped and she's pivoted to self-love content. Ironic given the damage she's left behind. But I don't engage. I don't check her page. I don't care. My parents, I heard they tried to contest the will. The court dismissed it outright. Apparently the lawyer said something like, estrangement doesn't erase entitlement, it reveals it. That made me smile. I've learned a lot about love since then. That it isn't loud. It doesn't need to shout over others to be heard. Real love feels safe, like quiet mornings and shared secrets and someone holding your hand in the dark. Caleb is that for me. So is Julie. So is Grandma. And so am I. The other day, I stood in the kitchen of our new home, sunlight pouring through the windows, coffee brewing, and I caught myself humming, just a soft, content little tune. Caleb walked by, kissed my shoulder, and said, "You've been humming a lot lately." I hadn't noticed. Peace has a sound. It's that the clink of mugs, the creak of old floorboards that you've come to love, the laughter of people who see you fully and stay. Some nights we sit outside under the fairy lights, Caleb strung up himself. Julie joins us, and sometimes Grandma too. We share stories, play cards, roast marshmallows. The world doesn't need to know about it. There are no hashtags, no followers, no performance. Just being. I still go to therapy, still journal, still wake up sometimes with a knot in my chest that takes a few breaths to unravel. But the difference now? I know it passes. I know I'm not stuck. And I know that just because they were my family doesn't mean they were my fate. People ask me if I'd ever reconnect. I don't say no. I say this, I've already reconnected with the parts of myself they tried to bury. With the girl who used to hide in her closet with a flashlight and a notebook, dreaming of somewhere softer. She made it. She made it all the way here. And she's not hiding anymore. She gets to write the ending now. And this time it's hers alone,